Jordan lead codices. These really caused quite a stir in the archaeological world back in 2005. Has it been that long, 12 years already? I want to start with an article here concerning whether they're forgeries or not, whether they're antiquities or not. And then I want to show you a book that I actually purchased new here lately with some wonderful color plates that I have scanned in, and show you some of the best pictures I've ever seen of this. Let's see, do I have that? I probably left the book in the room. I have to go get it. But a lead codex discovered in 2005 in a cave in northern Jordan that forms part of a collection of Jordan lead codices, was recently tested at the University of Surrey with the ion beam with exciting results. This is pretty exciting. I'm reading a press release from University of Surrey Medical Center. Director of the university's Ion Beam Center, Professor Roger Webb, and Senior Liaison Fellow, Professor Chris Janes, confirm that a lead codex on loan from the Department of Antiquities in Amman for testing does not show the radioactivity arising from atmospheric polonium that is typically seen in modern lead samples, indicating that the lead of the codex was smelted over 100 years ago. Comparative measurements were made of a sample of ancient Roman lead unearthed from an excavation site in Dorset to validate the measurement protocol. Because these codices were considered to be modern forgeries. As no alpha particle emissions could be detected from the lead book samples under test, it can be confirmed that the lead is not of modern manufacture, as it has no detectable lead-210 isotope. The construction technique with raised characters, implying that the pages are cast from the melt, means that the writing and decoration can't have been added at any time after the point of manufacture. When taken together with mass spectrometry, that is particle-induced X-ray emission, results taken in 2012 at the Nopus Center, the composition of the metal with significant tin, antimony, and other impurities indicate that the metal is not modern. According to Professor Webb, 50-year-old lead gives a significant signal as to the modern lead used was from lead shielding installed in the center's lab in 1960, some 50 years ago. So the lead in the codices is more likely to be over 100 years old. 100 years ago, the Dead Sea Scrolls had yet to be discovered, and yet to change scholarly understanding of this period. On a scholarly level, such a forgery would require the very latest academic research. According to independent analysis, and there's the analyst here, Matthew Hood, with about 1,000 letters after his name, Ministry of Defense employee for over 20 years and deputy project manager for the Future Royal Yacht, and who has been examining the codices since 2009, the level of corrosion exhibited in some of the artifacts within the original collection, and particularly the visible formation of mineral crystals as the metal reverts to organic compounds, provides strong evidence of the great age of some of these artifacts. While there may be variations in decay and corrosion that depend upon the environmental conditions in which the objects were stored or hidden, there's a strong underlying theme of decay from within the metal. It is oxidizing and breaking down at atomic level to revert to its natural state. This is not witnessed in lead objects that are several centuries old, and is not possible to produce by artificial acceleration, that is, through heating. This provides very strong evidence that the objects are of great age, consistent with the studies of the text and designs that suggest an age of around 2,000 years. Some of the features are consistent with a few of the objects being potentially another 1,000 years older than that. This is from high-definition visual and photographic comparison with Bronze Age and Iron Age artifacts in museums. And I quote, "The suspicion of forgery sown by the bloggers and a rashly published note in the Times Literary Supplement in 2011 has been disproved by several independent scientific tests of the metal, as well as yet unpublished expert study of the writing. No one of those actually involved with the research on the codices has any doubt about their antiquity." So says Bernhard Lang, Emeritus Professor of Religion, University of Paderborn and St. Andrews, Doctor of Theology Habilitus, and more letters behind his name. Evidence gathered since 2008 from 12 laboratory tests, as well as hundreds of detailed photographs or detailed microscope examination of several artifacts, provides a wealth of data regarding the corrosion of the metal, accretion of patina on the surface, and confirms that they are genuine artifacts that are many centuries old. Comparison with lead samples of known ages from churches, roofing, and other archaeological sites provides strong evidence that at least some of these objects are over a century old. Additional evidence drawn from study of the alphabet characters, designs, and content, where it's been decoded anyway, strongly supports the fact that these objects are real and merit considerable further study. All charges of fakery and forgery raised by bloggers and some scholars should now be dismissed to allow proper study and preservation on the sites in which these items were discovered. Honestly, after these came out, I read a lot of blogs and a lot of expert archaeologists that completely dismissed these codices out of hand as being antiquities. And so I kind of lost interest in them simply because people that didn't know any better, or people that didn't want such artifacts to come out, simply came out to say that they were not authentic. And I guess a lot of people lost interest after that, but now we've got the goods on this. The Jordan Codices comprise a series of upward of 70 ring-bound books made entirely of lead, with strong evidence showing that they date back to the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. Linguistic analysis has demonstrated that they are the earliest and only Hebrew Christian documents in existence. Do you hear this? This is exactly the opposite of what the vast majority of so-called experts have told us all along. In fact, the signals or characters on these codices were declared to be nonsensical, or by persons that had no real understanding of language at that time. Preliminary work indicates that part of the collection dates to the 1st century, whilst the other part dates to the 2nd century. Distinguished archaeometallurgist and former director of antiquities in Amman, Dr. Ziad Al-Saud, has hailed the archaeological site as one of the most historically important in Jordan. These manuscripts are a part of Jordan's heritage and global heritage, and we hope to share it soon with the rest of the world. Ziad al-Saad, former Director General of the Department of Antiquities in Oman, etc., said, well, we would like them to share them with the world, but my understanding has been that the Jordan Antiquities has not let anything go out of their storage except this one codex to be tested. And the word I got was that they never will. For these professors who actually did the testing, they're declaring these things to be the earliest Hebraic Christian documents in existence. Well, that remains to be seen. But if by any chance that was true, then we would wonder whose portrait is fused into this lead and tin mixture, whose face is smelted right into this lead. Well, I'm going to try to see if I can't have us look at these photographs I have put together in haste today, in haste. I worked so hard on that Paul Loves Poppaea essay last night that I just ran out of time. And so I have been running as fast as I can to get something ready for today for this. Let's look at the pictures and then let's look at some of the interesting stuff that David and Jennifer Eckington has to say about Essenes and these codices. The Eckingtons were the ones that really brought this out. That's nice. And after doing some preliminary research and writing this book, which is really like a mystery book, the way it's written, they tell the story of finding these. They have been barred from even looking at them. So let's see if I can get the pictures up here. I've got so much on this computer that I'm going to have to look for a minute. I just now scanned these things. Okay. And so I'm going to set this to show my screen. Aha. Here's the book cover. Quote from the Jordan Times, more historic than the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovering the lead codices, the book of seven seals and the secret teachings of Jesus by David and Jennifer Eckington. Well, that's pretty bold right there, because in the book, which I haven't read yet, just scanned through it, they claim that among these codices is the book spoken of in Revelation, that one with seven seals, as well as something regarding, I think in Daniel, it says, seal this up until the end. No? See if I can make this a little bigger. Yeah, not much bigger. And I got to get rid of this thing somehow. It's supposed to go sideways. Can you see my zoom bar in this picture?
No.
Okay, you can't see it. All right, well, that's good. Does this picture come out fairly well on your screen?
Yep, very good.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry, I closed the window. Here's the page with the portrait on it. You'll notice how these holes around the sides of the page here, and some of the other ones contain a lead spiral.
You're not showing the page.
It's not? What's it showing?
All the images as a small icon.
All right, let me try again. How about now?
Yep, good.
Okay. I was kind of hoping there was a way to just go from one to the other. I just didn't have time to set this up as a slideshow or anything. How about now? Limescale, detritus, and corrosion on display around the Davidic palm tree. That is the tree of life, and 8-pointed stars, which indicates the coming of the Messiah. Could this be a Hebrew Christian book? You can very well make out the palm tree and the stars. Imagery that, of course, hails to the New Testament as well as the Old. And you can pretty well make up the lettering on the front of this book if you look closely. I don't see much there I can recognize. I see some things that could be Greek letters like tau and omega, and other ones I can't really figure out. And there are some in there that look like J's. We need a symbolologist here. This still has the lead rings in it. Note this corrosion. I thought that was extremely interesting when they're saying this lead is going back to its natural form, oxidizing, turning into other elements. Oh, this is awkward. Oh. Do you see the side view here? Tell me, somebody.
Yes.
All right. The seal rings are surprisingly fragile and all too easily fall apart upon attempting to open any of these codices. This reminds me of the copper scroll, in a way. If you were to open these, how in the world would you be able to do it without destroying? In the copper scroll, they used a pretty primitive method, but it worked. They used a saw and they cut down the sides of it, leaving strips half the circumference of the entire scroll that they could peel off of there and read. I don't know what they're going to do about this if they ever open these things up. And the variation of thickness. Now, can you imagine what this thing looked like 2,000 years ago? I would love to get in that. Now we have two pictures on this page. Can I make that bigger somehow? Probably can. Email, blog, locate on disk. Figure 8 here on the left. Open book demonstrating further watermark corrosion and coloration. Note how the page rides up around the sealing rings. Take a look here. This is just like our wire-bound books today. In our service just a minute ago, we were using my Elohim's wire-bound book, and I've had some of these for several years, and the wiring is actually moving up out of the pages, and that's what's happening here. Then at the bottom, the smallest of the books are just over an inch square. This exhibits the flowering pomegranate, symbols of the high priesthood. That is an inch square. And remember, these pictures were not engraved on here. They were smelted on. It looks to me like it wouldn't be that easy to get into this book. It is so sealed up. You know, I cropped all these too. I wonder what happened to them. At the top here, as work progressed, we were surprised at the interior state of the book. That doesn't really look too bad on that one. Then below, a micrograph exhibiting pitting, both in and around the lettering, demonstrating that the letters cannot have been added at a later date. Patina. Again, patina was the thing that authenticated that the James ossuary came out of the same tomb as, well, we call it the Jesus family tomb, or talpiot. Even though the James ossuary was stolen and split off from the other ones for years and years, the patina was exactly the same. There had been in the Jesus family tomb some rose-colored clay that had seeped into that tomb. And this James ossuary had that same rose-colored clay patina with exactly the same makeup. Does anybody know Paleo-Hebrew? That does not look like a Paleo-Hebrew letter to me. Although that, of course, looks like a tau. Figure 12, crystallized surface deposits can be seen in the lettering around the menorah. All right, here's the menorah up here. And this picture is really cool. When I saw it, it made me hungry. I've got mushrooms in the refrigerator that I'm going to fry up. This looks like mushrooms. A micrograph showing linen fibers caught in the lime scale and detritus. What kind of fibers? Linen fibers. And who wore linen at that time? Who was carrying this book around? Oh, shoot, I wish I'd have got my crops up here, but I'll put a slideshow together of this if you want to look a little closer. Etrogs, a species of citrus seen here on one of the lead tablets from the hoard. The sheen is the result of being coated by olive oil. What do we know etrogs from? Yeah, somebody popped up here on the chat. The picture is closed. What does that mean, it's closed? Okay, well, I'm going to...
Yeah, move on. That was a while ago.
Okay, well, I lost it there entirely. I'm so sorry that I'm not getting the pictures I had prepared, but I didn't want to wait all day. Yes, etrog. Hi, Paula. At Sukkot with the lulav. You still have it, or is it gone?
Yep, it's there. I see it.
A large inscribed bowl found in the hoard. It is one of the few items made from copper that we were witness to. And if you can see around the bowl part itself, there's all kinds of inscription, all kinds of letters and symbols. At that time, you know, they had these divining bowls. They're made out of copper, sometimes tin, sometimes bronze, or out of a human skull as well. These bowls around the edges or inside the skull were written all kinds of symbols for divining things. I wonder if this is not the same kind of thing, a divining bowl.
It's like a Seder plate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's see, I don't see any etrogs on there, but I see some interesting letters or symbols of all kinds. I will put a slideshow up of this and make the pictures much bigger. The mikvah, or Jewish bath with descending steps on the side of the road parallel to the valley in which these were found, and below a sarcophagus next to the mikvah. Well, if that's an ossuary, it's huge. This might be the kind of so-called table or refrigerium in which they laid a body in for the first year, assuming these are Jewish people. Next, we have the landscape on the upper part of the valley of the cave site. Very rocky, looks like limestone, no? And below, the oleander bushes on the way down into the valley. I thought oleander was a tree, a poison tree at that. Here we have Jennifer and Hussein. Hussein's the guide. Outside the first tomb cave, discovered on our descent into the valley. But that was exciting. And below, the interior of the first century cave tomb, depicting the slabs of stone used to lay out bodies. I didn't look at these pictures ahead of time. I just scanned them as fast as I could. That's something for the archives, though. It was only in the first century that Jews laid people out in such a way and then collected the bones for their second visitation or second burial into the ossuaries. So when we see things like this, we know it's got to be from the first century because that's the only time they did it. I can't read it. But whatever it is, immediately outside the first century cave tomb. Can you read what that is? And then below, a pomegranate grove near to where we took tea with the shepherds. So in their book, what they're doing is they're explaining their whole trip. I'm kind of looking forward to reading it, especially in regards to why they're no longer able to look at it, and some of the results they got from the skeptics. Here's David inspecting the cut tomb in the cave shown to them by the shepherds. In bottom, a view from Jordan to Israel overlooking the site of the Battle of Yarmouk, just a short distance from the cave site. You notice on the above picture, it looks to me like that particular tomb cave was chiseled out of what appears to be limestone. Here's a portrait of one of the shepherds in the valley side. He looks like a modern man, doesn't he? And below again, the eye sockets of a skull can distinctly be seen in the face of the valley cliff. The eye sockets of a skull, I can't see them. Maybe when we get a little bigger picture, we'll be able to. And those are the plates in the book. Lovely. Now, for their explanation of Essenes in this particular setting, I go to the book, page 94. I hardly ever buy a new book. Hey, no marking in it. Judaism began to emerge as an exclusive religion from out of the Babylonian exile. 586 to 539 BC. It was shaped fundamentally by its first prophet, Ezra. As a name or movement, the term refers solely to those who returned from Babylon back to their homeland of Judea. The entity formerly known as Israel, the 10 northern tribes, they went elsewhere. These people were the lost sheep that Yahshua spoke of. To the north, the Samaritans, much adulterated though they were by outside influences, were to claim the identity of lost Israel. Remember how the Samaritans came into being when Assyria sent people into what was Israel at that time to replace those that they had taken captive out. And so the Samaritans turned out to be of mixed Judaism and non-Judaism, or actually paganism. But the Samaritan religion is so close to the Messianic religion that we observe, much closer than we would be to Sadducees or even Pharisees, because the Samaritans were completely Messianic. In fact, you remember the story of the Taheb, the Messiah of Samaria, leading the people up Mount Gerizim in the first century to rebuild the ruins up there. And the Romans met them on Gerizim, halfway up, and executed them all. There still were looking in the time of Yahshua for Messiah, as we witnessed from John chapter 4, the woman at the well, I believe. To the south, a more conspicuous movement came together within the geography of Judea, yet set apart from the everyday life of the Second Temple, which encapsulated the aims of the community, Yahad, of the Jews. The temple that Zerubbabel was to reconstitute in 515 BC and rededicate had been cleansed of all its former affiliations. It was now the home of the only God that mattered, Yahweh. Thou shalt have no gods other than me, he said, indirectly admitting that there were other gods. The centralized temple became once again all-powerful and all-consuming. All other gods were banished. The community that came together to oppose this view cherished a much older vision, one that came to be recognized as Christianity. For not only did these believers seek to preserve the lifeblood of Israel, literally flowing through their veins, but also they sought to keep alive what was extremely ancient belief, one that no amount of editing could expunge from the holy books. More remarkable still, they didn't pay any heed to the temple in Jerusalem. That was now lost to them for good. Instead, they continued to bow their heads at sunrise and sunset in the direction of Egypt, to Heliopolis, home of the oldest of the dying and rising gods. This community was the Essenes. Well, I would question that a little bit. I don't think they were taking the sun as a god. Heliopolis means city of the sun. It was prophesied in Isaiah that that city would be of great importance to Yahweh. And if you've listened to some of our events on Egypt and the Essenes, we can understand the connection, especially Qumran and the temple at Akhetaten. It's obvious now why the temple Jews should be so opposed to the Nazarenes, and also to the Essenes. Both were sects that had very good claims to predating Judaism, and in the view of the opposition, they were legitimate targets precisely because of their legitimacy and because of their connection with what was seen as old and ultimately pagan. But they thought, anyway, both within the context of first century Palestine, were to claim the moral high ground, but from a different perspectives. Judaism was initially very radical in terms of both approach and application. During the tumultuous era of the first century, it had become ultra-conservative. Might we say, infused with Greek and Roman theology. To the Nazarenes and the Essenes, it seemed that Judaism, in being a centralized and altered belief system, was essentially corrupt. Law was placed above humanity. Essene belief offers an intriguing link between the pattern of one emergent culture and the vast antiquity of another. From what little is known of them, the Essenes seem to have formed a settlement near the shores of the Dead Sea around the 2nd century BC. The general consensus of scholarly opinion seems to be that they withdrew from Jerusalem in the reign of Jonathan Maccabee, 143 BC, to form a community in the area of Sakaka, read Qumran. Apparently, the group opposed the appointment of the new high priest, Jonathan, because he was not from the correct hereditary priestly family. The exile group was led by a prominent priest known only as the teacher of righteousness. For obvious reasons, Jonathan, it's believed, is a candidate for the identity of the wicked priest mentioned in the community's surviving texts. These texts are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which remained hidden for almost 2,000 years until their discovery in the 1940s and 50s. The term Essene does not occur in the community's description of itself, as found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's very likely that the Essenes and the Nazarenes were in fact the same sect, and that is indeed our premise here. But I might also say that the words in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're full of the word Essene. If we understand it from that Essene was a Greek derivative of Hosea in Hebrew, those doing. The Essene communities were to be found throughout Judea and beyond, not just by the shores of the Dead Sea. Intriguingly, there are many similarities between their faith and what we have come to recognize as Christianity. They shared communal meals, believed in the coming of the kingdom of Elohim, underwent baptism, and partook in an early form of Eucharist. Key among their precepts was the belief in a kind of semi-divine hero figure who would come to renew the covenant with Elohim. It was this that particularly interested me, as on the Codices, there are voluminous displays of 8 pointed stars, symbolic of the expected Messiah, as well as palm trees representing the line of David, from which it was hoped that Messiah would spring. The Essene communities scattered throughout Judea and linked by a common cause were also the keepers of secrets. As Dr. Margaret Barker puts it, Margaret Barker is an expert in the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially the Book of Enoch. She's an academic professor. She's written voluminously about them, and especially the faith perspective of the Essenes. I have collections of her essays. You ought to read them. She comes from a university atmosphere, but she seems to have a faith perspective. She's so famous now, and she's retired, that Nobody's going to bug her about it. She says, they kept alive the memory of the first temple, which had been heaven on earth, and of the anointed priest king. In their writings, the rituals of the old temple became their descriptions of heaven. And they remembered how the priest king had entered the Holy of Holies as a man, but returned as Yahweh to establish his kingdom and judge his enemies. The Essene Nazarenes were harking back to the days of splendor. Furthermore, the Codices seem to be intimating these factors very explicitly. Had they been sealed in order to preserve those secrets? It would seem that what we have at the outset is a breakaway movement from mainstream temple-based Judaism. I would say that the mainstream temple-based Judaism was a break-off from the Essenes. I feel like I can prove that. In fact, it's not hard to prove. Just that we're so used to thinking temple-centrically that when our mind goes to classic Judaism, of course, we're going to think of the temple. Itself broken up after the death of Yeshua, and that from this one movement, a number of others emerged. In truth, there's little evidence at all that links the scrolls with the Essenes. Haven't we been saying this all along? At least with the Essenes of Philo. And we've got to remember these Qumranites were a break-off sect, and they wrote their own books and mixed them in with the Enochian books of the Essenes. The connection is still a matter of dispute, although the general scholarly consensus is that it exists. The question is, who were the Essenes? There have been attempts by some scholars and writers to link them to a warlike, bloodthirsty sect called the Zealots. This view is in large part based on conjecture. Philo of Alexandria, sometimes called Philo Judaeus or Philo the Jew, writing in 25, points out in no uncertain terms that they didn't bear any weapons, nor were they to be associated in any way with the making of weapons or anything warlike. Josephus echoes this view and also states that the Essenes nowhere had strongholds to defend, nor did they fight in battles. One of the most famous references to them was made by Roman senator and man of letters, Pliny the Elder, AD 23 to 79. Remember, this guy is the one that died at Herculaneum when Vesuvius went off. He went to Herculaneum, Pliny the Elder, to try to rescue people there, but he got caught up in the bombardment of ash and lava, who stated that they lived on the western edge of the Dead Sea and that they had no women, no sexual desire, and no money. That's what the appearance was. The Essenes seem to have been spread throughout the region of ancient Judea. They were called polistai, meaning they were of the city. So their connection with the settlement at Qumran sometimes seems questionable. Yes, it does. Opinion has changed over the years, but the common consensus now is that Qumran was indeed inhabited by a religious sect of nonviolent persuasion. Certainly the idea that it was a fortress for anti-Roman rebels has been effectively disproven. The truth be known, nobody knows. There are as many opinions as there are experts in this case. Our best bet is to follow along with a person that we can trust. And that again is Philo Judaeus. What he says, I trust what he says. He was an honorable man. though a Hellenist. He had a high respect for Essenes, and his description is cogent and it makes sense. Let's see. It is known mainly from the works of first century writers that there were aspects to the Essenes in their beliefs that in time would come to be recognized as Christian. They practiced baptism and sharing of communal goods and the participation in rituals involving bread and wine, a meal that was held in honor of the Messiah to prepare for his coming. The Essenes are praised by Josephus, who is himself of priestly descent. He writes about them as follows. The doctrine of the Essenes is this, that all things are best ascribed to Elohim. They teach the immortality of spirit and esteem that the rewards of righteousness are to be earnestly striven for. It also deserves our admiration. How much could they exceed all other men that addict themselves to virtue? Now, we should have rehab centers for those addicted to virtue. I imagine it won't be long before addiction to virtue will be written up in the DSM-6 as a mental disease. Somebody else whom we've already encountered was rather partial to the Essenes. Writing in the Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus comments that Herod tried to enforce among certain parties in Judea an oath of fidelity to himself and his government. However, of all the parties concerned, the Essenes were excused from this oath. Herod apparently held the Essenes in high esteem. Indeed, he seemed to be in awe of them. I wonder if Herod would be in awe of us who are trying to learn the Essene way, the Nazarene way. The existence of the Essenes raises some disturbing questions, not least among which is their apparent connection to what the Jews had simply called paganism. It's very much a reactionary view, as they were actually following antique temple practices. Temple Scroll, remember? I'm working on that translation right now. I'm working on it. It's something we haven't had. It's not been restored. It's written in such obscure language, the translations we have are worthless. I'm going to fix that. And I'm in the process now. The Talmud refers to certain groups of Essenes, possibly those who lived in the Essene quarter in Jerusalem, as Canaanoists or zealots, not in the sense of the term today, implying extremism, but zealous in the priestly sense, people who were zealous in the service of Elohim. This appears in the Gospels as Canaanites, or actually Canaanians, which some scholars, particularly Professor Robert H. Eisenman, understand as a term for the violent variety of zealot, thus making the Essenes and the zealots one and the same, fanatics. I think Robert has a very good theory there. Well, that is a really good question. We certainly could go into that. I've done that on other shows. Rachel Elior considers the Dead Sea Scrolls to be the actual books from the temple before they were polluted by the Maccabees and later the Pharisees that came into possession of temple books. She understands that when the teacher of righteousness left into exile, that his group took all the books out of the temple because those books belonged to them, and took them out and hid them in these caves. If they had taken those books, like she says, they would be all the more hunted. And we read about some sets of secret books in literature very much related to these people, like definitely Enoch, definitely in 2nd Enoch as well, definitely in 4th Ezra. And it's probably alluded to in the literature that tells us that Enoch wrote 360 books. Maybe it's alluded to there. The Essenes, being the remnant of Israel, were also prophets, and accordingly they were descended from the ancient kings of Israel and Judah. Fundamentally, Essenism, through a combination of historical factors, has come to be seen as the larval stage of Christianity. And when we look further at this enigmatic sect, we see very little difference indeed between Essenisms and emergent Christianity. One seems to be a development into the other. I think the transitional text is the Epistle to the Hebrews. We see the transition. We see one that has come over, writing to those that haven't. And the evidence for that is perhaps their use of the Dead Sea Scroll, the coming of Melchizedek, in writing the Epistle to the Hebrews. I think an Essene wrote that to the rest of the Essenes that were not believing, to convince them, because the Essenes believed there would be a second coming, but it would be Melchizedek in the flesh. And of course, that prophecy was written long before Yeshua ever came along. So it would definitely make sense if Melchizedek had come in the guise of Yeshua ben Yosef. I'm not sure she actually counters them, those beliefs. I'm not sure. If you have some quote or a reference, I would really like to see that, Norman. Larval stage of Christianity and development from one into the other. According to Josephus, Pliny, and Philo, the Essenes were thought to have been some kind of philosophical connection, had some kind of philosophical connection with the Pythagoreans, and it's possible that many of their beliefs derived from this ancient thinker. However, it is known that Pythagoras in turn derived much of his knowledge from a 6th century BC Jewish source, believed by Professor Ben Zion Wachholder of the Hebrew Union College, Cincinnati, one of the leading experts in the Dead Sea Scrolls, to have been the prophet Ezekiel himself. And I think that you'll find that viewpoint pretty well echoed in Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible? I've seen in several different Essene books that people considered Ezekiel the first Essene, but I certainly think that it went back way before that. And if they have any connection between, if there's a connection between the Pythagoreans and the Essenes, then it's undoubtedly the Pythagoreans that had become influenced by Jewish thought of the time. Such a view, if correct, would certainly tally with the later acceptance of Christianity in northern Palestine in the late 1st century. There was a well-established Essene communities up in the north. I would certainly like to see where these people got that information, because the one that people think was established up in the north, that is at Mount Carmel, doesn't seem to have existed. Let's see. Oh, I just got a little more, a couple pages. Things now begin to get very interesting indeed, particularly with regard to Josephus' use of the cognomen Essene. Josephus wrote in Greek, but his works were translated into Latin early on. The term Essene is one that has distracted scholars over the years. I got a question this morning from a lady who's confused. Was it this morning? Well, it was either today or yesterday, about Sadducees. Why is it that people think the Essenes are Sadducees? Well, this is the reason. Because Sadducees, that word comes from the Greek word sadok, modeled on the Hebrew word, zadik. Whereas Zadokites comes from the Hebrew word. So they're spelled differently. And when the house of the Zadokites became exiled, the new priest just kept the title as Zadokites. So Sadducees and Essenes are really going to be mixed up unless you understand the difference. They're the same name, but two very distinct groups. The term Essene is one that has distracted scholars. It's apparent that the Dead Sea community didn't refer to themselves by this term. And as Josephus was writing in Greek, it had been extremely difficult to derive the original Hebrew meaning of the word. However, for what it's worth, I believe that it is a pun for what may turn out to be a very broad concept, definitely. The English word essence, and I'll cut it off here, has its origins in the Latin essens, E-S-S-E-N-S, from the verb esse. You remember your Latin? To be, esse, to be. I believe that Josephus was aware of this pun. When writing in Greek, he would have been very familiar with the original Hebrew word for Essene. Essence is a synonym for the soul, the light within. The community calls itself by such terms regularly in the scrolls. Before the sun is up, they utter no word on mundane matters, but offer to him certain prayers, which have been handed down from their forefathers as though entreating him to rise. Before meat, the priest says a grace, and none may partake until after the prayer. When breakfast is ended, he pronounces a further grace. Thus, at the beginning and at the close, they do homage to Elohim as the bountiful giver of life. For it is a fixed belief of theirs that the body is corruptible and its constituent matter impermanent, but that the spirit is immortal and imperishable. The etymology that I have offered is in no way fanciful. It gives us the flavor of Essene belief. The Essenes themselves would have transmitted the knowledge, the nous, N-O-U-S, of their sense of Elohim, not by compiling books and treatises, as historians seem to expect of them, but by means of puns and philosophical associations. For this is a period in a society wherein people learn by giving out the right question, in the response to which they were given the correct answer, in contrast to the present day when information is thrown at us from all sides. Modern scholars have admitted their own exasperation with trying to formulate a reasonable, accurate etymology for Essene. That's because when you got two rabbis, you've always got three opinions or four. It's not hard. It's not hard. I've been on that quest too to find that word, and I'm satisfied. This led me to investigate less recent sources, and in my quest I came across the following. The Jewish Encyclopedia claims the Essenes as a branch of the Hasidim, of Maccabean times. I do believe that. This is a quote from Godby, 1930. No even semi-plausible etymology for the name Essene has been found, but the ancient authors agree that the name had to do with holiness, piety, or special consecration to Elohim. Philo of Alexandria explained that it meant therapeutai theia, ministers of Elohim. Without recanting a score of fanciful etymologies, all the evidence points to an ancient order of sun worshippers from the Euphratean alluvium. They were not sun worshippers. Some of whom were Judaized. Others had become associated with a shrine at Ephesus. This is curious given the later Christianization of the shrine to Mary. The evidence points to the familiar Akkado-Assyrian cultist term, Asenu. Asenu, a devotee or a temple servitor. Asenu is an intensive form and would imply very devout, assiduously religious. This is remarkable in that it confirms the temple-based perspective of the Essenes that they were devout, implying that they were also preservers or restorers. No, wait. The term Nazarene also means preservers or restorers, etc., etc. And so I'll stop there. Anything I can do for you? Well, tomorrow, is it tomorrow? We've got, no, I don't know. Tomorrow, when's the Detox Whisperer coming on? I don't think it's tomorrow. I think it's the next Sunday, but I might be wrong. Might want to check. Mark Heston is getting a following. I've had people write to me, he's right on. We believe this all the time, etc. And then I've had people write to me, he's crazy. His diet will kill you, etc. But I appreciate some of you having a constant diet of some of my historical findings. And I appreciate you being here very much. And I seem to be on a roll these last 2 weeks. I'm going to try to keep on with it.
It's good. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And Yahweh be with you all this week.
You will record this, right?
It's recorded. Yeah.
Okay, good.